So, how does a court balance justice for a victim with the unbelievably tragic history of an offender? In this explainer, we're going to pull back the curtain on a real Canadian court case. It shows you one of the toughest decisions a judge ever has to make, the sentence. And it all starts with a judge's solemn duty.
Those are the words of the judge. They're simple, they're direct, and they carry an absolutely immense weight. This isn't just some theoretical exercise, This is the moment a person's future is decided. And it all begins with the facts. Before a judge can start weighing any other factors, they have to start with the cold, hard, undisputed reality of what actually happened. The circumstances here are just stark. A woman in her 50s, asleep in her own bed, the one place on earth she should have been safest. She wakes up to find Mr. Kasook assaulting her. And this wasn't just a sexual violation. There was physical violence involved. The evidence? It was undeniable. DNA testing confirmed his identity. These are the brutal, foundational facts of the case. But it's not just about the physical evidence, right? The court also has to hear and really consider the human cost of the crime. And that comes through in what's called a victim impact statement. The victim didn't participate further in the report, but her written statement says so much. Those words, hurt, despair, ugliness, they speak to a violation that is so much deeper than just the physical act. It's a trauma that affected her and her whole family. Now, this is where the case gets really complex, because the court has to turn its attention to the offender. And this, right here, is where the central dilemma of this whole thing really begins. The court is actually required by law to look not just at the crime, but at the life that led the offender to that courtroom in the first place. In Canada, this is guided by something called the Gladue principles. Now, it's really important to understand this is not an excuse for the crime. It's a legal framework that forces a judge to understand the bigger picture. Things like colonialism, family trauma, and abuse that have led to Indigenous people being so overrepresented in the justice system. For Miller Kasook, these factors aren't abstract at all. He was diagnosed with fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. He was exposed to severe neglect and his parents' alcohol abuse in what the official report calls a chaotic, unstable, and violent environment. Just imagine, he actually saw his mother stab his father. By the time he was 10, he was abusing alcohol himself, and by 15, he was on crack cocaine. As the judge put it, these were the direct consequences of very bad decisions made by other people. So, now you see the problem, right? The judge is staring at two deeply compelling realities: the terrible harm done to the victim and the profound trauma that shapes the offender. How on earth does the law reconcile these two things? Well, the guiding light here is a principle called proportionality. This is really the cornerstone of all sentencing. The punishment has to fit the crime, of course, but, and this is the key part, it also has to fit the person who committed it, taking into account their actual level of responsibility. And this just lays out the challenge perfectly. On one side of the scale, you've got the aggravating factors, the things that argue for a tougher sentence, the victim's vulnerability, the violence, and Mr. Kasook's long criminal record, including the fact he'd just gotten out of prison for something similar. But on the other side of the scale, you have the mitigating factors. He pleaded guilty, which is huge because it spared the victim from having to testify. He showed what the judge felt was real remorse. And, of course, those profound Gladue factors from his tragic life. Now, in this case, there was one more crucial piece to the puzzle. The two opposing sides, the prosecution and the defense, they actually talked and came to an agreement on the sentence. It's called a joint submission, and in the legal world, it carries enormous weight. A judge will almost always accept it unless it's so completely out of line that it would be contrary to the public interest. So how does all of this come together in a final decision? After considering the crime, the victim's suffering, the offender's history, and the lawyer's agreement, the judge made her call. For a crime like this, the judge pointed out that the usual starting point for a sentence, kind of the baseline, is about 3 years in prison. That's before you start adding or subtracting things based on the specifics of the case. But because of those aggravating factors, especially him being just released from prison, both lawyers agreed 3 years wasn't enough. They jointly recommended 4 years. The judge agreed to the 4 years. She even said herself it was on the lenient side, but she concluded it wasn't unreasonable. So here's the key takeaway. His guilty plea and his tragic personal history, those Gladue factors, were significant enough to balance the scales and justify that specific sentence. But 4 years isn't exactly how much more time he'll spend in prison. You see, Mr. Kasook had already been in custody for 271 days waiting for his sentence. It's common practice to give extra credit for that time.
So that credit added up to just over a year, leaving him with 2 years and 11 months left to serve.
Okay, so the sentence is handed down, a number is calculated, a person goes to prison. But is that the end of the story? Justice is also supposed to look forward, and the judge's final words weren't just about punishment, they were about the future.
In the end, the judge looked at Mr. Kasook and delivered this powerful message directly to him. It's a recognition that his past, as traumatic as it was, can't be changed. But it's also a challenge for the future, and it really leaves us with the central question of the justice system itself. Can a sentence ever be more than just punishment? Can it be a real turning point? And can someone, no matter what's happened in their past, truly change their own story?